Starfield has a problem. Over the past 2 months, it really feels like the community has gradually turned on the game. Following the Starfield Direct, some fans declared it the game of the year. But now, look at some of the popular Starfield communities and you'll find a complete opposite opinion. You can regularly find fans complaining about the game, and it seems like a lot of this isn't just noise. The review scores for Starfield have been dropping to a pretty extreme degree, and it really seems like a course correction is desperately needed here from Bethesda, although even despite that, the updates you've been getting from them just continue to be bizarre. And oh yeah, did I mention that Starfield has a big mod problem? As it seems like this time around, even modders may have some problems fixing some of the major issues with the game. With that said, I think most of us could agree Starfield's a great game. It has great story content and just overall a boatload of content for the amount of money it does cost, especially if you're playing on Game Pass, but it is absolutely a flawed game. And I think the more hours you put into it, the more that becomes apparent. It seems like the sentiment is being echoed throughout the community because players are just unhappy with Starfield, and you can see this reflected in several metrics now. The Steam reviews provide the clearest picture of that. As of right now, Starfield is the lowest rated mainline Bethesda Game Studios game on Steam, which, yeah, let that sink in. Starfield is rated lower than Fallout 76 as well as all of the other major releases from Bethesda. And it's not like this is getting better. Very shortly, Starfield's likely to switch to mixed overall as opposed to mostly positive where it sits right now. This will be the first mainline Bethesda Game Studios game to have that rating on Steam. And it's not like this was a one-off review bomb that cratered the score. No, the Starfield reviews have actually been getting worse over time, especially as of late. More than half of the recent reviews are negative for Starfield, and if you look at Starfield's rating for all languages, it's already mixed. These numbers are trending downwards, as even a few days ago, recent reviews were in the low 50s, but now you could find them in the high 40s. So that means over 50% of these new reviews coming in are negative ones. So okay, the reviews are one thing, but Starfield has had the largest launch in Bethesda history, so surely the player count is fine, right? Well, not exactly. Things are not nearly as disastrous on the player count side, but if you look at the available data, which is just Steam players for right now, Starfield is losing players notably faster than previous Bethesda games. Of the mainline single-player releases over the last decade, Starfield had the most significant player drop by a fairly large margin. So despite Starfield arguably being the biggest game Bethesda has ever released, at least for the hours of content you could experience without any mods, people are abandoning this game faster than they have with both Fallout 4 and Skyrim. And sure, I can already see the comments, well, tons of people are playing on Game Pass, so these numbers are skewed. But yeah, that's exactly why we're looking at the player drop percentage, not the raw numbers. If you actually compare the raw numbers on Steam, from time to time, Starfield and Skyrim, a decade-old game, have similar numbers of players playing them. Typically, Starfield will peak higher towards the end of the day, but still, that's not a great look for your brand new RPG. And if anything, you'd have to imagine Game Pass players are leaving even faster. The vast majority of people on Steam seemingly paid $100 to play Starfield early. If instead this was just included with your Game Pass subscription, I would have to imagine that you're going to stop playing Starfield much faster because the cost to enter to start playing was much lower for you. And although Xbox does not share concrete player numbers, we do know that Starfield is still one of the top played games on Xbox and the most played game in Game Pass. Or at least it was. In the hours since recording the audio of this video to editing it, Minecraft has supplanted Starfield as the #1 Game Pass game, at least for now. So at the very least, things are staying strong on Xbox, and in fairness to Starfield, when you look at other non-Bethesda single-player games, this drop isn't nearly as bad. But I suppose that kind of is the problem here. Starfield is performing much more like a typical single-player RPG, and unlike past Bethesda games, which tend to have this special, almost magical staying power. And a lot of the times, why these games have that staying power is mods. But unfortunately, even mods are shaping up to be a pretty large issue for Starfield, despite being described as a modder's paradise. If you go to any of the major modding communities for Starfield right now, you'll find many prominent mod authors, probably a bunch of names you'll recognize from past mods for Fallout 4 and Skyrim, voicing concerns about the game and its modability. And in preparation for this video, I spoke to several of these prominent users to find out exactly what is going on. And this even got to the point where just a couple of weeks ago, Nexus Mods themselves published an article detailing some of the issue with Starfield mods and their potential fixes. But from my experience speaking with mod authors, the modability of Starfield's game engine was described as hostile. Things are far more difficult to navigate compared to modding Fallout 4 and Skyrim, even at the same point shortly after release. And this is a big contributing factor as to why the modding scene for Starfield, despite getting tons of content, still does kind of feel gimped. Like many of the mods that we are getting are just a bit simpler compared to even at the same point with Fallout 4. Part of this issue is the hostile nature of the code, and a lot of the older mod tools that worked for Fallout 4 and Skyrim not working for Starfield. It's not like this is a simple fix. This would take months to years of effort to get them working again due to some of these changes being just not super mod friendly. And to get a bit more specific, one of the core issues with Starfield mods is this mapping or plugin problem. Everything in Starfield and even past Bethesda games has a form ID. If you ever click on something in game with the console open and see those numbers, that's part of that ID. Plugins, which are basically all of the mods you download and even some of the core game files, are assigned form IDs, that little number or letter combination that goes next to them. This is how your mod list identifies mods and core game plugins, and they could even interact with each other. The problem with Starfield is the way these plugins are mapped to each other can be broken far more easily, even as just a result of changing your load order. So let's say Bethesda releases Starfield DLC 1, shifting down all of your plugins and changing up the order. Well, simply by doing that, several of the mods in your load order may have just been broken. This is something that you could easily and quickly do with past games, but with Starfield it creates much larger issues, because all of the form ID references that your mods were using are switched around, and it'll be attempting to edit the wrong masters. Right now, this isn't a huge problem because Starfield's core plugins are fixed in place, but the second you get DLC, and some people don't get DLC, so their load orders will be different from one person to another, this will become an issue, but perhaps that's the silver lining here. Things are so messed up right now with form IDs and this mapping problem that even Bethesda releasing official DLCs would break things, meaning that they basically have to fix this, and it likely will be resolved by the time official mod tools come out. But unfortunately, that's not the only problem. There's also issues with ESL files. These are some of those newer mod files that don't occupy a slot in your load order, meaning that you could have more of them. The only restriction being that these are smaller files, so it's only going to be able to be used for smaller mods that can take advantage of this file type. But for some reason, with Starfield, Bethesda relegated ESL files to a totally separate load order. So now the game has one load order for some of your traditional plugins, but then a separate load order for light plugins, those being those ESL files. And if you switch a mod from one list to another, things will break. If a mod outgrows its ESL packaging and switches to an ESP, as those files do have more storage, anything that was dependent on that mod will now be broken and must be reworked. The exact same process was seamless with Fallout 4 and Skyrim. So simply put, after speaking with several mod authors, modability was not a development goal with Starfield, especially when you compare this to past Bethesda games. And for a lot of mod authors, this has been incredibly frustrating, to the point where some of the mod authors I spoke to who have already released mods for Starfield just quit. A lot of this has to do with Todd Howard in interviews talking about Starfield as a modder's paradise, but in reality it's almost the exact opposite of that, and actually far more difficult to mod compared to past games. As it was described, how the most moddable parts of Starfield aren't actually Starfield. It's a carryover from Fallout 4. A lot of the new systems that were added for Starfield, or some of the carryovers from Fallout 76, have far more limited and minimal modding capabilities, with one of the biggest issues being mod to mod compatibility. Like yeah, if you just want one mod to edit the Outpost system, that may be able to work quite nicely. But the second you want to add a second mod, things devolve very quickly with how Starfield is built compared to past games, and as a result, you'll likely need a lot of patches to make sure mods can work together nicely. But even with these glaring issues in mind, that doesn't mean things will be a disaster. Like yeah, as of right now, Starfield modding is definitely weaker compared to previous games, even at the same point immediately after release, but a year from now we might see some of the best mods ever once official tools drop, right? Well, maybe. The simple reality is that just releasing the mod tools won't fix many of these issues, and instead, several of Starfield's internal systems would need to be redesigned so mods can happily coexist, a process which may take quite a few months, and with the rate Starfield has been getting fixes thus far, perhaps this means modding is more of a late 2024 prospect at best. Because as of right now, the real core of this issue is how delicate the entire process will be. Like yeah, sure, once mod tools come, we'll get weapon mods and things like that, just like past games, but the second you want to start creating larger load orders with Starfield, problems will arise. Like even as a simple example, if you want to edit multiple things about this room from two different mods, like if one mod moves this chair and then another mod moves this shelf, those two mods won't be compatible. Instead, you'll need a patch to make sure they're both compatible. This was not an issue whatsoever with past games, and you could extrapolate that very issue to many of Starfield's internal systems. And while limited modability definitely will contribute to some of the issues with Starfield, it's not the only explanation for this declining review score, as I think another core issue here is update frequency from Bethesda, as the patches and bug fixes for Starfield have all been relatively small at this point. Like even the big update that just recently went into beta on Steam after a month of waiting, like yeah, it does have some incredibly good changes, particularly around performance. I'm now able to play Starfield almost consistently in the mid-hundreds of FPS. But even this big update that took a month of dev time only has 39 changes in total. Starfield has been out for 2.5 months now and has a grand total of 58 changes, including this new beta update, which isn't even live on all platforms. And sure, Starfield had one of the best releases for a Bethesda game. It really felt like we saw less bugs than ever before from Bethesda. But it's not like the game doesn't need fixes. For example, I encountered this quest blocking bug the week of release. And now here, over 2 months later, that bug's still around. This still hasn't been addressed even in this new beta update. And many of you watching right now may have had a bug-free experience. So you might not be able to relate to this at all. Like, I don't really need more updates for this game. But just one bug can really ruin things here. Imagine you dump 50 hours into your save until suddenly you just can't progress the Ryujin questline anymore. And since you're on Xbox, your only option is to either wait until Bethesda actually fixes it, or just start an entire new game and lose all of the progress you made. There's some people in that situation who've already been waiting over 1 month for the developers to fix that bug, and it still hasn't come out yet. I could definitely see how even just a singular bug in a situation like that can really turn a user off from this game. And as far as why some of these updates to Starfield are so small, I honestly have no idea. Bethesda is a large company, and perhaps there's just a bunch of manpower devoted to Starfield DLC, or maybe even fixing some of those mod issues I just talked about. But the size of these patches and the gaps in between them just feel rough, especially when you're talking about progress blocking bugs that are affecting main quest lines in the game. These are top priority issues that people have been dealing with for months now. And even when it comes to some of the core issues of Starfield, around exploration, the encumbrance of load screens, and really just the general content distribution being frustrating for a lot of players, I don't know how Bethesda could fix a lot of those problems. Like yeah, we can get more and closer points of interest on planets, so planetary exploration feels a lot more interesting and rewarding, but that would require a lot of content to get things feeling fresh. And I don't know if it's realistic to expect that we're going to get that amount of extra content for free just from updates. The main issue I have with Starfield is just how segmented it feels. You fast travel from a quest location to another quest location, and that organic interaction in between just feels a bit more lost here. Instead of wandering around random streets making surprising discoveries, you spend a lot more time just looking at load screens. Thankfully, these are often really fun pictures I took, but I for one would have loved to see a couple of planets have multiple major cities on them. I think that would have gone a long way to making things feel a bit more interconnected and getting away from some of those load screens that become incredibly prevalent. Maybe that is a direction they'll go in with the DLC, and I personally would love that, but for the base game, you can't really change things at this point. They designed it with 1,000 planets in mind, and as a direct byproduct of that, Starfield just has lots of travel. And due to how space travel works in Starfield, that means lots of load screens. And I really think these are additive problems. As you play Starfield, the poor exploration and content segmentation between tons of load screens just becomes more and more tedious. The first 30 hours of load screens are fine, it doesn't really bother you all that much. You still got that initial excitement about the game and its story, which is great, but over time it adds up and does genuinely become annoying. Although I don't want this video to get misconstrued. Starfield definitely has some issues, and hopefully I did a good job at laying out what I think some of the larger issues are here, but Starfield's still a great game. I think it's a game that all Bethesda fans should be buying and playing, and when you get tired of it, just put it down and play a different game. But with that said, you can definitely feel the growing resentment against Starfield from Bethesda fans, and hopefully this video does a bit to explain why that is. Doesn't mean it's a bad game, but it's definitely a flawed one. But hey, even flawed games can be incredibly enjoyable, just look at Fallout 76. And I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on Starfield and its future? How does the post-launch support make you feel? And just in general, how much did you enjoy this core experience? But if you are interested in a preview of Starfield's next update, check out this video where I highlight the major changes already in the beta.